So we've got Yuliu in Romania. We've got Ali in Marrakesh. We've got Sharon in Belfast, and we've got Rob. Well, we've got Little Miracles in the Fen somewhere in Cambridgeshire, and I'm down in Swindon, but we're crossing the Atlantic for tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And tonight, for our children's night, we are crossing the Atlantic to Montreal in Canada, where we find Rob Cloney ready with his story.
Hello.
Hello, Louis.
Hey,
How are
Louis.
you?
Hi, Don. How are you?
We're very good. We're very good.
Welcome, Louis. You're just in time for the first story.
Brilliant.
I don't know if you heard John say that I'm joining you from Montreal on the other side of the Atlantic. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, because of the time difference, for me, it's only 1 o'clock, but for you, I imagine it's just about supper time. Maybe you're feeling a little hungry right now. So I thought I would whet your appetites with a story about some food. And
Brilliant.
now I'm going to tell you an original story for the first one, and it's got a particularly Canadian flavor. And there's a pun in there, which you'll understand later. And the name of the story is PJ's Pancake Palace. And this is a story about a little girl named Amanda. Now, Amanda is a lot like you, Louie, and a lot like other kids. They enjoy spending time with their family. And Amanda had a particular thing that she liked to do with her family. She loved to go out for brunch. And they had a particular place they liked to go, which was called PJ's Pancake Palace. Now, because they go there so often, everybody knows what they're going to have. Dad always starts with the lumberjack breakfast with bacon and eggs and sausage and potatoes and toast and beans, and probably a lot like an English breakfast, the ones that I enjoyed when I was there. Now, the mom has a bit of a sweet tooth, so she has waffles with strawberries and bananas and whipped cream and chocolate poured over that. And well, between you and me, it's probably more of a dessert, but that's okay. Now, Amanda's brother, Michael, he has a more sophisticated palate. He likes to eat eggs Benedict. But Amanda, she doesn't really care what she eats as long as it has one special ingredient. And this is something that comes from Canada and the United States, but the biggest producer of this is in Canada. Anybody know what it might be that she might want to put on her pancakes?
Oh, can I have some maple syrup, please?
Maple syrup. As long as it has maple syrup, she is perfectly happy. And on this particular day, she decided she was just going to have one giant pancake and she was going to drown it in a lake of maple syrup. Now, the waiter came and took their order and off he went. And Mom and Dad were chatting and Michael was doing the crossword puzzle. But Louis, you're not going to believe this. Amanda was staring at the center of the table because there in the center of the table was a small pitcher. And on that pitcher was a spout, and hanging from that spout was a little teardrop of maple syrup. And she couldn't help herself. She reached out and took it and popped it into her mouth, and she said, "Oh my, who knew a finger could taste that good?" Well, the waiter still hadn't brought the food, and well, the maple syrup was still there in the middle of the table. So she looked around, nobody was paying attention. So she picked up her spoon and picked up the syrup and poured it in and quickly popped it into her mouth. And she said, "Oh my, who knew a spoon could taste that good?" Well, the waiter still hadn't come and that maple syrup was still there in the center of the table. Well, she picked up her spoon again and the syrup and started to pour, and she looked to make sure that nobody was watching. And that's when it happened. The syrup poured off of the spoon and down onto her plate. So she quickly ate the syrup off the spoon, picked up the plate, and she licked up one side and down the other and back and forth until every last drop of maple syrup was licked off of that plate. Well, it just so happened that the waiter arrived. We have fast service. The waiter arrived just at that moment when she finished licking that plate. And he began to put all the food down. And all of a sudden, Amanda's mother, and Amanda looked up. She had a very guilty look on her face. And her mother said, Amanda, honey, I know that you love anything with maple syrup on it, but of all the things that you could put syrup on, which one tastes the best? And Amanda said, Mom, that's easy. The thing that I can put maple syrup on that tastes the best is my tongue. And that's the story of PJ's Pancake Palace. And now you might get the pun when I said it has a particularly Canadian flavor to it. So that is hopefully going to whet your appetite a little bit, but you know, it's nice to be able to go to a restaurant and just order food, but not everybody has that luxury. Have you ever heard the story of the leopard eating dog? It's from the Panchachantra, which is a very, very old book out of India, and it tells a lot of stories. And one of these stories I really like. It's about a dog who was raised on a farm, and this dog, well, he'd gotten a little bit old. His bones creaked a little and his teeth weren't as sharp, and he didn't really have the energy that he had when he was a younger dog. And his master one day decided, well, maybe it's time to put him away. But he decided he was going to leave him in the jungle and let the dog fend for himself, come what may. Now, the problem is when you're a dog raised on a farm, you really don't know how to hunt for food or even to forage for food. So the dog was, you know, really hopeful that he would come across different little items that he could eat. And it just so happened on the day that this story took place, he happened to find an old bone that still had some marrow in it. And there he was chewing on that old bone, trying to pull whatever nourishment he could out of the bone. And all of a sudden, from the corner of his eye, he could see something moving. It was a leopard. Oh, it was a leopard. It was a young leopard. It was a strong leopard. And it was a leopard with sharp teeth. And it was a hungry leopard. And that leopard began to creep forward towards the dog because he had decided that he was going to have that dog for his breakfast. But an old dog knows a few tricks. So without any hesitation, the dog picked up the bone and tossed it ahead. And with the loudest voice he could muster, he said, "That leopard was delicious, but I'm still hungry. I need to find another leopard." The leopard heard this, he stopped, and he began to back into the forest. Now, he got into the forest and he started to make his way when all of a sudden he heard a voice from up in the trees. And the voice said, "You fool, you fool. He tricked you. He tricked you." Louis, who do you think might have been up in the tree yelling down at the leopard?
I know, Rob. It's going to be a monkey.
It was a monkey. And the monkey was laughing at the leopard, and the leopard got very angry. And he said, I'm boss around here. Nobody tricks me. He said, "Come down here, jump on my back, and I'll show you who's boss. I'm going back to get that dog for my breakfast." And so, monkey on his back, that leopard went back to where he had seen that dog. Now, the dog, of course, had just gone back to chewing on the bone. That was pretty much all he hoped to have for his breakfast. And as he was chewing on it, once again, from the corner of his eye, he could see that leopard. Only this time, there was a monkey on the leopard's back. But again, an old dog knows a few tricks. So he just did what he had done before, threw the bone ahead, and in his loudest voice said, "Oh, I'm still hungry. Where's my monkey? He promised to bring me another leopard." And with that, the leopard stopped and he backed into the forest. Now, I can't tell you if that dog had anything else for his breakfast that morning, but I'm pretty sure that leopard, he had monkey for breakfast. And that's the story of the leopard eating dog. Now, finding food is one thing, but wouldn't it be great if you could just make food out of nothing? I mean, just pick up anything and pull together some food. There's a story about an old beggar who was able to do this. This was an old beggar who used to go from town to town, and he would ask people. He didn't really want to work that much, and he just needed a little bit of food, a little bit of drink to replenish his energy so he could continue on his way. And on one occasion, he came to a town and he recognized right away where he was. He was in a town that was infamous for being cheap. People there were really tight. They wouldn't share anything with their neighbors. They wouldn't give anything. And this town was noted all across the country, and he knew where he was. But if he was going to have any supper that night, he had to do something. He had to use his brain. So he walked up to the biggest house in the town. It happened to be the mayor's house. And he knocked on the door. And from inside came a voice. "Go away, beggar. I have nothing to give you." And the beggar was ready. He said, "Your Honor," he said, "you misunderstand." He said, "I'm not here to ask you for anything. I'm here to give you a gift. I want to make for you my world famous stone soup." And the mayor said, "Don't be ridiculous. You can't make soup from a stone." "Oh, indeed you can, Your Honor." He said, "In fact, I happen to make the very best stone soup in the world. And if you would allow me to make it for you, I would be very happy. And I don't require anything from you except for the loan of a big pot. If you can loan me the pot, I'll make the soup. I'll be on my way. Your pot will stay with you." Well, the mayor thought, I have nothing to lose. And a free meal. Well, who's not going to be happy about a free meal? So the beggar and the mayor, they picked up the big pot and they took it out into the yard, and they made a big fire and they filled the pot with water, and soon it began to boil, 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 boil. And after a while, the beggar, he pulled out a very special ingredient, dropped it in. It was the stone. And the mayor was still skeptical until the beggar pulled out his ladle and tasted the soup. Delicious. Couldn't be any better. Well, honestly, it needs a little salt, but we don't have any salt, and it'll be fine without it. A little bland, but it'll be good. Now, the mayor wanted the very best stone soup that he could get, so he said, "I may have a little salt. Let me check." And he came back and sprinkled the salt in, and it continued to boil, 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 boil. Well, after a bit, he pulled out the ladle again, and delicious. Couldn't be any better. Well, it'd be nice if we had a few potatoes to thicken it up, but, well, we'll make do with what we have. Well, once again, that mayor, he wanted the very best stone soup that he could get. So he grabbed some potatoes and chop them up, dropped them into the pot, and it continued to boil, 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 boil. Now, while all this was going on, the neighbors had started to peek through their curtains, and they were watching their mayor give food to a beggar. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, and they got very curious, and they all came out and gathered around and watched. So the next time the beggar pulled out the ladle, delicious, couldn't be any better. Well, maybe a little beef would be nice. One of the neighbors said, "I have some beef." And she ran off, came back, they chopped it up, dropped it into the pot, and it continued to boil, 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 boil. Now, the beggar, he kept pulling his ladle out and tasting the soup. And each time he would notice just one little ingredient that could make it a little bit better. And all the neighbors were very happy to go and grab that item and drop it in because they were curious. How do you make soup from a stone? Well, soon the beggar pulled out the ladle for the very last time. Delicious. Couldn't be any better. My friends, the soup is ready. Please bring your bowls and your spoons and we'll feast together. And boys, did they feast. Some people had 1 bowl. Some people had 2 bowls. There were a few people who had 3 bowls of that soup. And before long, the pot was empty, save for 1 ingredient at the very bottom. And the beggar, he reached down and he pulled out the stone. And he said, I want to thank you all, friends, for a lovely evening, but it's time for me to go. But they all said, no, you can't go. If you go, we'll never have stone soup again. And the beggar looked at them. He said, you've been very kind to me tonight. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll leave the stone for you. And with this, you can make stone soup whenever you want, but I'll leave it on the condition that you always invite your neighbors and everybody always drops something in the pot to make it that much better. And they all agreed they would. So the beggar, he handed the stone over to the mayor and he passed it on to the next generation, who passed it on to the next and the next and the next, until finally it was put into my hand. And I have to tell you, Louis, if you were here in front of me right now, I would give you the stone so you could make your very own stone soup. But alas, we are separated by water and time. So maybe in the future sometime we'll get together and I'll bring that stone for you. And that's the story, my version of stone soup. So, making something out of nothing. I have a niece who has a very active imagination, very active imagination. She's always seeing things that aren't there and talking about events that never happened, and always in good fun. And so one day I decided to write a story for her that's just about that very thing. And it's called There's Something in Your Beard. Now, Maria loved her Uncle Robbie. And I'm not saying that's me, but I will say he's a bit of a stout guy and he has a big beard, a lot bigger than mine, actually, big fluffy beard. And Maria loved having him come over to play because he would always take time and sit down with her and play whatever games she wanted. And on this occasion, they had just sat down and they were going to play checkers. And they just made a couple of moves when all of a sudden, Maria heard a sound. Meow, meow. Louis, what do you think that was? What do you think she heard? Was it a cat, maybe? I think it was a cat. And she said, Uncle Robbie, I think there's a cat inside your beard. And he said, Maria, there's no cat inside my beard. There's nothing inside my beard. She said, I'm pretty sure I heard one. He said, okay, when I go home tonight, I'll check. But Maria, there's nothing in my beard. Well, the next day he came back and he said, Maria, I checked. There was nothing there. Well, they began to play another game, Crazy Eights, and they were throwing the cards down. And all of a sudden, Maria heard a sound. What do you think she heard? Monkey. She said, Uncle Robbie, I think there's a monkey inside your beard. He said, Maria, there's no monkey inside my beard. There was no cat inside my beard. There's nothing inside my beard. She said, I'm pretty sure that I heard one. He said, okay, when I go home tonight, I will check. But Maria, there's nothing in my beard. Well, the next day he came back. He said, I checked, Maria. There was no cat inside my beard and no monkey inside my beard. There was nothing in my beard. Well, they had just set up a canvas. They were going to do some painting when all of a sudden, Maria heard something. Uncle Robbie, I think there's an elephant inside your beard. Maria, there's no elephant inside my beard. It's too big. There's no way there's an elephant in my beard. Maria, there's nothing in the beard. She said, I'm pretty sure I heard something. He said, okay, when I go home tonight, I'll check. The next day he came back and it was a totally different story. He said, Maria, I owe you an apology. Did you find something? He said, I did. Now, Maria, there was no cat inside my beard, and there was no monkey inside my beard, and there was certainly no elephant inside my beard, but I did find something. What did you find? Maria, I found a story, and it's the one that I just shared with you now. Clever. Nice to be clever. Now, I have to tell you, there's an argument that goes on. I'm a teacher, by the way, and my students sometimes have little debates. Who's smarter, girls or boys? And well, I don't think you'll ever find an answer to that question, but they like to have the debate. So I usually will tell them the story that I'm about to tell you now. It's called The Clever Daughter. And I tell them that if there's ever an argument to say that girls are more clever than boys, this is the story. So it's about a farmer, actually, and his daughter. And well, they were farmers by name only because, well, they didn't have any land. I mean, they're like a boat without water. You know, you can call it what you want, but without the water, it really doesn't function at all. So there was the farmer and his daughter, no land. And the farmer, he came up with an idea. He said, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to see the king, because the king has lots of land and he's not using most of it. Maybe he'll give us some of the land and we can do some planting, grow some food. And so his daughter went with him. But when they got there, this was a king who loved to play and he loved riddles. And he said to the farmer, well, if you're any good at riddles, I might just give you some land, because I have a riddle for you now. If you can solve it, I'll give you the land. And the farmer said, oh dear. He said, I'm really bad at riddles. There's no chance. The king said, let's try it. He said, here's the riddle. What is it that you're born with and you die with? If you eat it, you will surely die. The rich want it and the poor have it. And the farmer scratched his head. He had no idea. But his daughter, she said, I know what the answer is. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard this riddle before. Anybody want to throw out the answer for us? Anybody know the answer to this riddle? You're born with it, you die with it. If you eat it, you will surely die. The rich want it and the poor have it. And the answer that the daughter had was nothing. You're born with nothing, you die with nothing. If you eat nothing, you'll surely die. The rich want nothing and the poor have nothing. Well, the king was so impressed with the daughter's answer, he said, you can have the land. And so the farmer, now that he had some land, set about doing exactly what farmers do. He began to plow the land the first day that he had it. And as he was going along, his plow, it hit something. And he dug down under the blade, expecting to find a big stone. And instead, he found a gold teacup. He couldn't believe his luck, a gold teacup. And he went to his daughter and he showed her and he said, I'm going to give this to the king to thank him for all the land. The daughter said, oh, that's a bad idea. He said, what do you mean it's a bad idea? She said, if you give it to the king, he's going to want to know where the saucer is. The farmer said, but I didn't find a saucer. She said, well, I know that. And you know that. But the king doesn't know that, and he's going to want the saucer. The father said, don't be ridiculous. I'm going to give it to the king. And he went back to the palace and he offered the gold cup to the king. And the king said, oh my goodness, it's the most beautiful teacup I've ever seen. But where's the saucer? Farmer said, I didn't find a saucer. He said, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Guard, come here. Take him downstairs to the special interrogation room, the dungeon. Find out where that saucer is. Well, down he went, and about a half an hour later, the guard came back, and he said, I can't do it. I can't do it, Your Highness. And the king said, what's wrong? He said, every time I go to torture that farmer, he keeps saying, why didn't I listen to my daughter? Why didn't I listen to my daughter? The king said, bring him back up here. We'll find out what all this is about this daughter. Well, the farmer was no sooner in front of the king than he asked. And the farmer explained that he had found the gold teacup, and his daughter had discouraged him from giving it to the king because he'd want the saucer. And well, he hadn't found a saucer and he was going to get in trouble. And that's what happened. The king said, your daughter thinks she's clever, huh? He said, I'll tell you what, you go home. You're free to go. But I want you to send your daughter back here. And you tell your daughter, I want her to arrive here, not by day and not by night. I want her to arrive not walking and not riding. I want her to arrive not clothed nor naked. And this is very important, I want her to come bearing a gift and without a gift. You can imagine the farmer, when he left, he was very upset because, of course, all these things were impossible. And he felt bad because now he had gotten his daughter in trouble as well. And he went and he explained to her what had happened. And she said, it's okay, Dad, I can do this, but I'm going to need a few things. I'm going to need a fishing net. I'm going to need a goat, and I'm going to need a dove. And the farmer looked at her and said, well, I don't see how any of that's going to help you, but if that's what you want, I'll get it for you. And when he returned from the market with these items, the first thing she did was go into the cottage, and she took off her dress and wrapped herself in the fishing net. And she came back out and she put her leg up on top of the back of the goat. And she asked her father, can you please tie my leg there to the back of the goat? And he did. And then she took the dove and she put it into a satchel that she had put around her neck. And she set off for the castle. And as it was, when she arrived, she happened to arrive right at dusk. So the sun had gone down, so it wasn't day, but it wasn't yet night because the glow of the sun was still there. So she had arrived not by day and not by night. And the king was waiting for her, and he said, you've arrived at the proper time. And he said, and I can see from looking at you that you're not clothed, nor are you naked. And I can see that you're not riding, but you're not walking. But have you brought a gift? She said, I have. And she reached into her satchel and she pulled out a dove and she handed it over to the king. And just as he reached out to take it, she opened her hands and the dove flew away. So he had a gift, but he didn't have a gift. And the king looked at her and he said, you are very clever and you're quite good looking too. He said, you know, I could use somebody like you as my queen, somebody smart to help me rule this country. Do you think you'd like to marry me? And she said, oh, I would very much. So they got married. But the king had one stipulation. Louis, he told the queen that she was to never disagree with him in public. And she saw no reason to ever do that. And she said, I won't ever do that. And she didn't. For about 6 months, they lived in perfect happiness until one day, a different farmer, who happened to raise horses, had a horse that gave birth to a foal. And I don't know if you know this about foals, but on the first day that they're born, they're able to stand and walk a bit, wobbly as they are. And this foal managed to wobble its way over to the adjoining farm and found itself standing right next to a cow. Well, you can imagine the joy of that farmer when he walked into his cow barn and saw that foal, and he said, my cow has given birth to a foal. Well, when the farmer who actually owned the foal heard about this, they got to arguing. They both wanted the foal. Well, somebody said, you two are never going to resolve this. You need to go see the king for him to bring an end to this argument. And so they did. Now, the king had lots of things on his mind and wasn't really paying attention. And he just said, the foal was with the cow, the foal goes with the cow. And the cow farmer, he was very happy, but the horse farmer, not so much. So when he was walking home, he was kind of kicking at the ground, and who should he come across but the queen? And she said, why are you so glum? He said, well, it's your own husband's fault. And he explained what had happened with the foal. And she said, tell me something. You know that big green field out in front of the castle? He said, yes, I know it. She said, tomorrow, take a fishing rod and go fishing in the middle of that field. The farmer said, why would I do that? You can't catch fish in the middle of a field. She said, trust me. And so sure enough, the next day he was in the middle of the field fishing, and who should come by but the king. He said, what are you doing? She said, well, I'm fishing. And the king said, you can't catch fish in the middle of a field. And the farmer said, well, I have as much chance of catching fish in the middle of a field as a cow does of giving birth to a foal. And the king said, I see what you're at. He said, all right. He said, but you weren't that clever yesterday. He said, who told you to say that? And the farmer explained that it was his own wife, the queen. He said, all right, you go collect your foal. I'll take care of her. He went back to the palace and he found her and he said, I told you never to disagree with me in public. You've embarrassed me. He said, so you need to leave the castle. I don't want you back here. But he felt a little bad because, well, he really liked her and they'd had such a good life together so far. And he said, you know, I want you to take the thing that is dearest to you from the castle because we've had a good life up to this point. And she said, all right. But before I go, would it be okay if I, served you a final meal? I'd make a nice big supper for you before I leave. The farmer, or the king rather, said, well, that would be fantastic. The queen was a very good cook. And so it was that she put together all his favorite meals, covered the entire table with wine and all this good food. And I don't know about you, but after a big meal, the first thing I want to do is close my eyes and have a good nap. And that's exactly what the king did, right there in his chair at the table. Well, as soon as he had fallen asleep, the queen had two servants pick up the chair with the king in it, and they carried it all the way to her father's farm. And when they got there, he had them lift the king gently from the chair and place him on the bed, and she tied him down. So the next morning when he woke up, he said, what's going on here? Why am I in the farm? Why am I tied down? And she said, you told me that when I left the castle, I was to take the thing that was dearest to me. And that is you. You're the dearest to me. So I took you. Well, the king started laughing. He thought it was so funny. And he said, all right. He said, let's go home. Let's go home. And after that, that queen, she never, ever disagreed with the king in public again. On the other hand, she never had to because the king had learned that whenever there were important questions to answer, he should always consult with his wife, the queen. And after that, the two of them became the greatest leaders that country had ever known. And that's the story of the clever daughter. Now, John, I don't know how much time we have. I have a couple of stories that one could be a little longer, one could be a little shorter.
Well, you got about 10 minutes, Rob.
Perfect. I think I might be able to slip them both in.
Does that work for you?
That's perfect. That's perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
All righty. So I'm going to tell you the story of the Mean King. And this is a story that kind of gets rid of the whole question about whether girls are smarter than boys, because this is going to show you that storytellers are smarter than all of them, everybody. Now, it's about a king who, well, he was kind of like the other king. He also liked riddles. But unlike the first king, who was just having fun, this king had a cruel streak in him. And he would have questions or throw riddles at his subjects. And, well, he did reward them if they were able to answer the questions. But if they were unable to answer the questions, he punished them in the worst way. And it so happened that he decided to question the man who was supposed to be the most clever man in the entire kingdom, his own advisor. So when the advisor walked into the palace, he said, advisor, come here. He said, it's your lucky day. He said, today, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And if you're able to answer those 3 questions, I'm going to give you 3 bags of gold. The advisor said, yes, that would be fantastic, Your Highness. But, advisor, should you fail to answer one of those questions, you'll only receive 2 bags of gold. and I'll cut your head off. The advisor wasn't really happy about that, but he said, okay. He said, and if you fail to answer 2, well, cut your head off twice and you'll only get 1 bag of gold. Okay, Your Highness. And of course, well, if you fail to answer any of the questions 3 times, your head's gone and you won't get any gold. The advisor said, but Your Highness, I only have 1 head. You can't cut my head off 3 times. He said, I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. Yes, Your Highness. All right. Are you ready for the questions? First question is, how many stars are in the sky? Second question, how deep exactly is the ocean? And the king said, and should you be lucky enough to answer those first 2 questions, well, you'll never get the third question. The third question is, what am I thinking? Well, the advisor left and the king said, have a great day. It's probably your last. And out the door he went, feeling very bad because, of course, he didn't know the answer to any of the questions. But who should he bump into? The court storyteller. The storyteller said, why so glum, chum? The court advisor, he explained to the storyteller what had happened. And the storyteller said, oh, it's a shame the king hadn't asked those questions of me because I could have answered them. And the advisor said, well, that's fantastic. Tell me the answers. I'll give you a bag of gold. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. All right, I'll give you 2 bags of gold. I'm sorry, I can't do that. All right, to be fair, I'll give you all 3 bags of gold, but please tell me the answer. And the storyteller said, no, you misunderstand. I said that I could answer those questions if the king asked them of me. And the advisor felt dejected, of course. He was still in trouble, but the storyteller wasn't finished. He said, you know, the throne room is really dark and you wear this costume with that big silly hat. You know, I think if I were to go in there, the king wouldn't realize it was me and not you. And the advisor said, well, that's a good idea. And, you know, if you answer the questions, you'll get the gold. And if you don't answer the questions, well, I'll still have my head and everybody will be happy. So it was. The next morning, it was the storyteller, dressed as the advisor, who walked into that room. And he said, the king said, advisor, you're here, ready to answer the questions. Yes, Your Highness. Now, does anybody remember the first question? How many stars are in the sky? And the advisor said, Your Highness, there are 974,683,976,462 stars in the sky. And if you don't believe me, well, you're welcome to count them yourself. And the king said, very clever. All right, here's your first bag of gold. Do you remember the second question? How deep exactly is the ocean? And the advisor said, Your Highness, the ocean is exactly 1 stone's throw deep. He said, What do you mean? That's not exact. Oh, yes, Your Highness, it is. He said, trust me, go out on a boat, go to the deepest part of the ocean and take a stone and toss it over the side. When it lands, you will have reached the distance to the depth of the bottom of the ocean, which is exactly 1 stone's throw. The king said, all right. He reluctantly handed over the second bag of gold. He said, that's all well and fine, but you'll never get the third question. Do you remember the third question? What am I thinking? The court advisor looked at the king and he said, Your Highness, you are thinking that I'm the court advisor, but I'm not. I'm the storyteller. What? I thought that you... you thought. Well, the king, he was obliged to hand over that bag of gold, but he was not happy about it. All I can tell you is at the end of this story, the court advisor lived a long and happy life. The court storyteller lived a long and affluent life. And as for the king, well, he stopped playing jokes and riddles on his subjects because, frankly, he couldn't afford it anymore. He'd given up all his cash. And that's the story of the mean king. So I'm going to tell you, thank you. I'm going to tell you one last story, and this is one of my favorite stories to tell. It's, if you're mathematically inclined, you might enjoy this one. It's about an old man and his wife, and they were very poor. And the only thing they had in their possession was a goose, an old goose. And one day they had nothing in their pantry, no money in their pockets, and they decided to roast up that goose. And as the goose was roasting, the man began to think, it's not right that a man should eat a goose without bread and without salt. It's just not right. We need bread. And he went to his wife and he said, I've decided I'm going to give the goose to a rich man, and hopefully he'll reward us with some bread and salt and maybe a few coins. Now, his wife didn't think this was a very good idea, but she knew that he had more sense than most. So she said, you do what you think is right. And when that goose was done, he carried it to the home of a rich man and he knocked on the door. And when the rich man came out, he said, my wife has roasted this goose for you and your family. Maybe you have something for us in return. Now, the rich man, he liked games, and he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, if you can divide that goose evenly amongst my family, or at least so that nobody feels slighted, I will reward you. And so he brought out his family, which consisted of himself, his wife, his 2 sons, and his 2 daughters. And the poor man, he looked at the goose and he looked at the family and he said, well, sir, you are the head of your family, so you get the head of the goose. And your wife, well, let's face it, women run the show, so she is rewarded with the giblets. And your 2 sons will walk in your footsteps, so they get the drumsticks. And as for your daughters, well, soon they're going to fly off and, well, they get the wings. Well, the rich man thought this was very funny, and he rewarded the poor man with bread and salt and a few coins. Now, a story this good gets around, and it so happened that in that town there was a miser who didn't really like it when other people earned and had some good fortune, and he wanted to have it too. So he decided he was going to go to the rich man with 5 roasted geese. And when he arrived at the door, he knocked, and the rich man came out and he said, I brought you 5 roasted geese for you and your family. Maybe you have something for me in return. And the rich man looked at him, and he didn't really like this miser, but he felt he had to treat everybody equally. So he said, if you can divide these geese amongst my family so that nobody feels slighted, I will reward you. But of course, dividing 5 geese among 6 people is really difficult. And he couldn't figure out how to do it. So he brought the poor man to help him. And the rich man allowed the poor man to help him because he was curious to see what he was going to do. And he said, all right. He said, 5 geese, 6 people. He pointed at the rich man and his wife. You and you make 2, and a goose makes 3. He pointed at the 2 sons. You and you make 2, and a goose makes 3. He pointed at the 2 daughters. You and you make 2, and a goose makes 3. And he said, oh, you and you, and a goose. You and you, 2 geese, and I make 3. And the rich man started to laugh, but the miser was very upset. He said, those are my geese. And the rich man said, no, you gave them to me. Those are my geese. He gave the miser a few coins just to get him out of the way. And then he turned to the poor man. He said, you may keep the 2 geese. And he rewarded him again with bread, salt, and some coins. And then he offered him a job because he thought, this is the kind of mind I need working in my accounting office. And that's the story of the old man and the goose. And my last story for this evening.
Thank you, Rob. And you've made an accountant who I know is listening very happy to make an accountant the center of the story. Thank you.
My pleasure. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in.
And that was fantastic. Louis, did you enjoy that?
Yes, but
Fantastic.
my internet.
Yeah, I know your internet kept
sorry.
freezing, didn't it? It kept going on and off.
Yeah.
However, we have a fantastic few days coming up. Sunday is the worldwide story round. So anyone who wants to come on and tell a story at 6 o'clock on Sunday is welcome. Monday is for historians, is a really special connecting the world by story, because we have Dr. Maureen James of the Fenland Museum, who happens to be a storyteller as well, talking about East Anglia, abolition, and if you remember the Chip's story about abolition, that's and Equiano. She's going to be talking about Equiano, and also the Clarksons for East Anglia, abolition, and Sierra Leone, because of the link between East Anglia, the Clarkson brothers, and Sierra Leone. And then we're going to have Yusuf Jaffa coming on and telling and bringing the whole story right up to date. So that's a sort of mixture of history and stories on Monday.
Wow.
Then on Tuesday, of course, is our weekly Young International Storytellers, where we have young tellers from all over the world. So, but for right now, could we have a large and huge and very noisy round of applause for Cloney? And because Rob actually can't, it's a bit difficult to make food out of nothing. If you go to the site and you see a little hat and you want to drop something in Rob's hat, that enables it, because he's a storyteller and he needs to eat, because us storytellers need to eat. Thank you very much. And we'll see you at some other time at the World Storytelling Cafe. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Ali, for driving the bus.
Louis just wants to say we found you on YouTube.
You
So
found
he's
me on
been watching we've been watching some of the older sessions.
Yeah.
And catching up, haven't we?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You've been
there's loads on YouTube, isn't there?
Yes, there is.
Yes, they
very
are.
good.
Yeah.
And you can find any of the older sessions if you go into the archive at the cafe as well. So, that's it. Well, there we are. From Northern Ireland to Canada to the Fens. We're there. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
See you next week. Next week, Hannah Brailsford on a Friday night. Thank you, Rob.
My pleasure, John. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
لا تأدوا أي حكي تنكون بالغلط. حاضر سيدي.